and welcome to the Hybrid School Builders Podcast. I am your host, Rebecca Foley, and I am so glad you are joining me today. I am a fellow grassroots founder who is hoping to make your journey toward founding a sustainable hybrid school a little bit easier. If you are dreaming of starting a hybrid school, or perhaps you've already gotten started, you are in the right place. Join me as we dive into real stories, practical tips, and hard-won lessons that I have learned to help you launch and grow your program with confidence. Remember, building a hybrid school is not just about creating a business or creating jobs. It's not even about just serving the children who attend the program. It's literally about reshaping the landscape of education, and we can do that one community, one entrepreneur, and one program at a time. Hi. So today I wanted to follow up on the last episode about your why and talk a bit about your experiences and your strengths. Now, I know a lot of times when you're excited about an idea, or maybe on the other end of it, you're feeling a little hesitant, you're not sure you can do it, you don't really want to take the time to assess your strengths or your weaknesses and figure out where it is you're going. Or maybe that's just me because I like to just get an idea and like dive headfirst into it sometimes. But I really think this is important for long-term sustainability. I did not do this, and sometimes it is hard to do it on a practical level because when you're in the beginning of a project, because when you're just getting started, you kind of have to do all the things. You don't have the luxury of saying, well, I don't really feel good at doing that thing, or just not really my strength. Like, you don't really get to make those choices. You just have to do all of the things. And that is true. But the key thing that I really think you need to understand is that for long-term sustainability, you want to be heading in the direction of an area where you thrive, okay? And even while you're heading in that direction, you very well may benefit a lot if you're at least aware of, maybe this is something that frustrates me, and this is why I just get scrambled, or I get frustrated every time I have to do this particular thing. And then, because sometimes it all gets jumbled in your head. You're like, oh, I'm just getting burnt out or whatever. You haven't really taken the time to like put your finger on why, like what part of the project is burning you out or really draining you. So I think it's just wise to take a little bit of time to just kind of think about your past experience, your past work experience, or even if you're a stay-at-home mom and you've got little kids, or that's what you've been doing for several years, which I know that's a lot of people out there possibly who are in this market of starting a program. We know taking care of a household and children is definitely work. You just don't get paid for it, right? And look at the things that are frustrating. Okay, and look at the things that you really enjoy, that really feed your soul, as well as the things that are draining to you, okay? And this doesn't have to be this big, like, psychoanalysis or whatever. You're just taking the time to just like with your why, you're taking the time to just like stop, think about it intentionally, like systematically, and write it down. And this can be like a 10-minute exercise. But I really think you'll benefit from it as you go forward, okay? And later on, I'm going to talk a little bit about like the organizational structure, if you want to call it that, of like a sustainable program, like the jobs that need to be done and like the skill sets that need to be there. And in a small program, there's usually only a handful of people who are running the program. So it's not like you have all this specialization and stuff. But even just a little bit of specialization and very much teamwork and communication is huge. It's so important. So if you can be aware of these things in yourself and in any employees you have coming up from the beginning, it's just really going to help you, okay? So what I think is helpful is to just go take a few minutes to go back and think over your last, 10 or 20 years of life and think, what is the work that I have done that I have really felt like I could get into the flow? I felt energized by it. I really felt like I enjoyed the work a lot. what you're going to be looking for is specific like types of work that you found really life-giving, and then the types of work that you found really frustrating. But I'm going to talk more about that in just a minute, just to give you like some language and some vocabulary about that. But right now, just go back and think about the times when you've really felt energized by your work and the times when you've really felt frustrated. What job were you in? What were you doing every day? If you were doing a whole bunch of different things all day, what parts were you like, oh, good, I'm glad I get to do this right now? And what parts were you like, oh, man, really, really don't like this part of the job, okay? And I am not telling you that you won't have to do those parts of the job, but you're just building an awareness, okay? Now, it's very helpful to have some language for this, okay? Now, I personally find that personality typing language can help you a lot. Some people don't find it that helpful. I find it very helpful, specifically Myers-Briggs, just because to me, it just gives like kind of the two ends of 4 different areas. I'll talk a little bit more about this in a second. And if you can identify with those, and then you can see where other people might be on that like spectrum, it can just give you the language to be like, oh, this is why my brain is working the way it is. And that's why that person is like saying the thing that they're saying. Or this is why this really frustrates me and drains me because I'm wired this way. And this is why I really enjoy this. Okay. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about Myers-Briggs. Working Genius from Patrick Lencioni, which is relatively new. Myers-Briggs been around for decades. I don't know, a long time. Working Genius is a newer tool, and that comes from Patrick Lencioni, who has written a lot of books on meetings and business like efficiency, but from a very like relatable, down to earth sort of way. He's written several like short little books. I recommend his resources. His Working Genius podcast, like go start listening to that now. And Myers-Briggs, you can find a lot of information online. I like personalityjunkie.com. They have a quiz on there. Okay, so those are the 2 tools. So, your homework after this episode is to, if you're like me, just like getting information, but even if you're not, like just get a little awareness so that you understand the language. The number one thing is just to have some vocabulary and some awareness. Vocabulary and awareness, okay? So Myers-Briggs, let's go back to that. In this one, I don't know, there's books written on this, so I'm not gonna like obviously get into a whole lot of it. But I'm just gonna give you a really quick outline. Okay, so there's introvert and extrovert, which is what a lot of us are most familiar with. But even this can be helpful because if you're a really, like, especially a really strong introvert, interacting and meeting and talking with people and like dealing with people's like expectations of you and emotions and all of that drains you, okay? And you kind of need to recharge, okay? Now, we all have to do that in our work, unless we work all by ourselves, but it's draining, okay? So just being aware of that can be very, like, just helpful. Even if you're an extrovert and you see other people and maybe they don't always engage the way that you expect them to, or they kind of retreat sometimes after a long day, and you're like, well, what's, just an understanding of like, well, that's just, maybe they're just very introverted and they really feel drained. It doesn't mean you don't like people. It doesn't mean that you're not outgoing even. It just means that it just takes a lot of energy to interact for long periods of time, okay? So that's just a helpful one. It's probably the one that's most like used nowadays. Introvert and extrovert, people use that a lot. Okay, so the next one is an intuitive versus a sensor. Okay, so the quick short version of this is that intuitive people are a lot more like in the world of ideas and more in their head. They're connecting ideas and it's much more abstract. That's probably the best word for it. So abstract thinking, the world of ideas, okay, versus a sensor is usually very like tactile and concrete and like in the presence of where they are, okay? Now, this is helpful for you as a founder because if you're like, oh, I've always got a million ideas, I'm always like, I am personally having an existential crisis like on a daily basis because I'm always like thinking about the meaning of life. I probably am an extreme for that. But like, if you lean toward that and you're like, splashing yourself with bleach while you think about the meaning of life, you're probably strong intuitive, right? Um, if you're a sensor where you're just like very present with what you're thinking about, what you're doing, you're very like with the sensory things. You can like literally physically and feeling and being present. That's that kind of like, those are like the ends of the spectrum, right? And you can be along the spectrum. You're not just like all one and none of the other. That's not how it works. But you can lean, more heavily in one direction or the other. Okay, this can be very helpful for you as a founder because you may get like either just not see things. Like I tend to just not see things that are sensory sometimes. Like I literally just don't think of them. And it's like, how can you be so absent-minded, right? But like, it's just because I'm like very much not a sensor, which doesn't mean that I don't, enjoy the world around me. I like my house to look nice. That's true. I like to my colors in my house, I paint and all of that stuff. That's a sensory sort of thing. But I'm not real great at like the details of things. I'm just always tending toward the world of ideas. Okay. So that can just be a helpful thing for you to see in yourself and in anybody that you work with. Okay. So sensors tend to think of very practical things like who's going to sweep the floor, who's going to lock the door, right? Where more ideas person, and I'm going to use some of this language with Working Genius too, because there's some overlap here. An ideas person may tend toward like, well, what if we started an after school program? Or, what if we combine the two classes together and then we could only use like a teacher and an aide, like you're like brainstorming and coming up with, usually it's solutions to problems. Sometimes it's like just coming up with ideas for the sake of coming up with ideas. But other times it's like, well, I saw a problem. So like I'm brainstorming ideas. Okay. This Working Genius talks a lot about this too. So either way, this is kind of that ideas thing. It's the Working Genius calls it wonder and invention, where you're like asking questions, solving problems, coming up with inventive ideas. Okay. And I'm not saying that there's some professional like crossover between those two. They're two different models. I just have observed that a more intuitive sort of person who's more in the world of ideas, who's more of an abstract thinker, seems to often also be the more wonder and invention sort of person, because you think like from what happened before and what's coming up, like you make a lot of connections because you see things abstractly. Where the more sensory person is like, well, but we won't fit in the room, or the door doesn't lock, or who's going to stay after to make sure that gets closed, right? Both of them are very, very valuable, okay? But sometimes they can frustrate each other because you don't realize that where the other person is coming from and why they immediately go there when you're like, well, I'm not there yet, I'm over here, right? And I think Working Genius comes in extremely handy for this because he literally talks about most projects going in the order of like, I'll just summarize it, to like kind of like creating ideas and brainstorming, to like discerning whether it's the right time, getting people on board, and then like actually making it happen and making sure everything gets finished to the end. The projects go in that order. So if you lean toward that, like finishing, making sure it gets done, everybody has what they need, and that's like your strength, then the ideas person can feel like they're coming out of left field all the time, but they're not. Like there's a time for them to create those ideas, but then they also have to understand that like sometimes we have the idea, now it's time to move into discernment, and then we need to go finish it. Okay. So Working Genius is helpful because it talks about how this actually applies in the working world as far as like getting from the beginning to the end. Now, if you recognize yourself in any of that and you're like, oh yeah, I'm definitely like ideas, conversations, just like, I don't even know where people are coming from. Like I get so overwhelmed by that. I just want to know like what I'm supposed to do next. Okay. You probably tend toward more on the tenacity part of Working Genius. I'll talk more about those terms in a second. And you may possibly be more of a sensor, but again, they're two different models, two different things, but I'm just trying to apply that to you as a founder. Okay. Now for all of this, I'll just throw this in here in the middle. For all of this, it's very important to realize that it's all valuable in its right place. Okay. So if you're recognizing yourself in some of this and you're like, well, I think I need to be more of an ideas person, more of a wonder person. I'm not real good at connecting like back and forth, but I'm really good at like doing what's right in front of me. Then that's like, write that down. Like this could be like a gap that you may end up wanting to fill with somebody that you know is a good ideas person, right? Or is a good brainstormer, or is like maybe a good discerner. Like they're very good at asking the right questions about like, is this the right time? Do we have the right resources? Who's going to do this? Okay, that's, if you're like, oh, I just like jump in with both feet and I don't always think of that. And then sometimes I get in over my head. Okay, like you probably need some discernment here and there, right? And that could just be like talking to your friend or your husband or, your mother or somebody that you know is good at this. Or it could be professionally getting a teammate in at some point. And it might just be like, coordinator or somebody who's just like helping you with some of the logistical things. But you know that they're good at this and you can bounce ideas off of them, right? Or it could go the other way. Getting someone on your board or someone you could bounce ideas off of if you're more of the tenacity person and you need someone to help you like brainstorm solutions to things or to like give you some discernment. Okay, so I kind of ended up putting Working Genius and Myers-Briggs on top of each other there. But just to review that, we were talking about Myers-Briggs and we started talking about Working Genius, but let me just outline that. Myers-Briggs, we've got introvert, extrovert. Okay, then we just talked about the intuitive versus the sensor, the ideas person versus the like concrete in the moment person. The next thing for Myers-Briggs would be the thinker and the feeler. Okay, that's the spectrum. That's the next spectrum, right? We talked about one spectrum, two spectrums. Now we're talking about the third spectrum. There's 4. All right. The thinker feeler the thinker is generally the person who their first kind of filter that they deal with situations or they hear things is like logic, like connections, like, okay, like why did this happen? And they think logically. Well, that person said that because, ABC. And it's like, it's very logical. Doesn't mean they don't have emotions. It just means that their strength is to think things through logically. Okay. A feeler feels with people, right? So they immediately maybe respond to the emotion that they feel in the room or to the emotion that they saw behind something somebody said. If they sense something like that emotion, they're feeling, they use their feelings to process, okay? Sometimes at the expense of logic, where the logical person might be too logical at the expense of feelings, okay? And again, it's a spectrum. You've got both sides of it. So if you tend to be more of a thinker and tend to be more logical, that's really valuable because you can take situations and you could like kind of fit them in where they like objectively fit, right? But if you tend to be a feeler, a lot of times you can be very sensitive to the situations that people are in or what they're trying to tell you with their feelings or the body language or whatever. And you can respond to that in a like sensitive way, okay? But again, like with anything, if you are all by yourself on one end of that spectrum and you don't have a balance on the other end of it, or you don't have someone else to help you see like, well, maybe that's not what maybe they weren't ignoring you when they didn't answer your email because they thought you were annoying. That might be what a feeler immediately thinks if they don't get a response. The logical person might be like, well, they just, maybe they didn't get it, or maybe they're just really busy right now, or whatever. Like that can happen with any number of things, okay? And this can happen like, that's like a personal thing. It can happen with work though, for sure, absolutely. It can even but it can also happen in like relationships, like let's say with a facility, somebody that you're working with, like say you're a program that's running from a church and you have to work with the Sunday school coordinator or, an elder or a pastor or somebody who's like in the building, right? And like they say something or they do something or they suggest something. A feeler may lean more toward like, oh, they don't like us. Like I have to be really sensitive to them because they don't like us, because they didn't like that we, left a little dirt on the rug or we left a map up on the wall and we weren't supposed to or whatever. And it's like possibly overreact a little bit into I don't want to say overreact like in a judgmental way, but like it's just like a hypersensitivity possibly because I want everybody to be happy and I don't want people to be, unhappy. So I have to fix this. And it's like, oh, I feel sad about this. Like I feel stressed about this. Where a logical, a thinker might take that and be like, well, maybe that person is, it's not that you don't respect what they say, but like maybe you already talked about this and there already was an arrangement for this. And the fact that maybe they were a little annoyed or they made a comment or something is just like, okay, well, but we already have an arrangement. We already have an agreement, and I'm going to respect what they said if they made a request of me, of course. But I'm also going to there's other people involved in this conversation. Like that one person who said that isn't really the authority or whatever. Okay, that's something that I've experienced, that kind of dynamic in a relationship, where it was well, there's two ways to look at this. So we kind of have to meet in the middle and maybe talk about it some more and make sure we understand the situation and not just immediately react. Okay, so our fourth one is the judger versus the perceiver. Okay, I shouldn't say versus. That's the spectrum, judger versus perceiver. And I know sometimes these words don't make a ton of sense, but perceiver tends to be more open to new information. So they might be well, I think we should do this. It seems like the best option. But let's wait and see if we get any more information, right? So they kind of, head down a path in general, but then maybe they get a new piece of information. Oh, maybe we should change and do it this way instead, right? Well, this can often drive a judger crazy because they're well, we made a decision, boom, we're putting blinders on and we're just going to do what we did last year, or we're going to just do what we did before. And I don't need any more new information. It's too overwhelming. It's too confusing. Okay. Again, it can be both ends of it are valuable, very valuable. Sometimes you do need to adjust. Sometimes you do need to get new information. You got to shift a little bit. But other times you can get super indecisive. That's me. Because sometimes you get really indecisive because you're so open to new information all the time that you can't just make a decision and just go ahead and just do the thing you decided. Okay. So again, it can be a little frustrating if you're working with two extremes on this, if you don't understand where the other person is coming from. Okay. But if you can have some humor and some, humility about it, oh, this is me being way too open to things. Just don't let me do that. I just need to stay focused on the decision we made. This isn't enough to throw us off. But sometimes you're oh, well, that new piece of information is we need to stick with what we decided. We can't go shifting things right now. Okay. And this is I'm simplifying this because these can feed into each other and all of that. But this is really useful, I think, for you to understand which of these people that you are. And if you tend very strongly in any of these directions, to realize that there's a very important part for you to play, but that you also may need somebody to come alongside of you to bounce ideas off of who tends in the other direction, just to make sure that you are seeing both sides of it and you're not just assuming, maybe assuming something or just missing, just not seeing some piece of it because you didn't have that other person's skill or gift to help balance out what you are good at. Okay. So this is a strengths weakness thing. Okay. Now, if you apply that back to your previous experience, job experience, work experience in your life, and you go back and you look at those situations and what frustrated you and what was life-giving for you, see if you can find anything where you're oh, this is why, if you're extremely introverted and you had to interact with people all day long in a job, and maybe you liked the job, but at the end of the day, you were just exhausted. Okay. It could be just because you're really introverted and you have to, maybe you need to learn how to take lunch by yourself and not hang out with, your coworkers during lunch. Or, you need to make sure that your car is quiet before you get to work. And when you go home, no radio or anything, just complete silence, right? You might have to realize what it is that's causing the drain and then just adjust for it a little bit. Okay. Or you can also think about conflict that you've had in the past. And sometimes this language can help with that. Oh, I got really offended this one time, or my coworker got really offended. I didn't see what was the big deal. I never did understand what the big deal was. Well, that could have been a think or feeler thing. Okay. Okay. So just be aware of all of that and apply that to the kind of work that you feel you really flourish in and the kind of work that you find frustrating. Okay. So because I talked mostly about working genius when I was talking about the intuitive versus sensory part of Myers-Briggs, because I think that's very applicable as far as being ideas person versus a finisher, sensory, concrete, in the moment person. Let me transition a little bit into talking about Working Genius again. So again, go listen to his podcast at Working Genius, the Working Genius podcast with Patrick Lencioni. And in short, he talks about projects and teams going through this like process, and the acronym is WIDGET, WIDGET. And he talks about wonder and invention being the beginning, discernment, galvanizing being the middle, and enablement and tenacity being kind of the end. Okay. And there's like this whole episode's on just one of those letters. But that's like kind of the order that a project will go through. And this is true for this project, like for starting a program, for starting a business, right? You see a problem, you ask questions about it. How can I solve it? You come up with ideas, you brainstorm, you discern. Discerning is what you're doing right now by listening to this, right? You're discerning, like, what strengths do I have? Is this the right time? Do I have, why am I doing this? Am I going to be able to make this sustainable? That's like the discernment part that follows on the ideas, okay? The galvanizing part is like getting other people on board and like just getting them really excited about your idea. If you need to do that, which you probably do need to do at some point. And then the enablers are people who are, and this is like a positive, somehow I have a negative connotation about that word, but like, enablers are people who are like, what do you need me to do? I'll just show up and do what you need me to do. Like, just let me know what I need to do. And that's like really valuable, right? But they don't always need to understand why they're doing it or like what the idea is, what the long-term goal is, or they don't necessarily need to understand that. And then tenacious people are the ones who like see things through right to the end, okay? Now, he says that, and you can take his quiz, I don't think it's free, but he says that most people have two of these areas where they're like a genius. They have two areas where they're competent, and then they have two areas that are frustrated, okay? And like when I took this quiz, I was like, oh yeah, that's probably me. It was like, your wonder and invention is like your areas of genius. Well, yes, I'm always asking questions and, brainstorming ideas and stuff. And then discernment and galvanizing. I was actually in the widget order. Discernment and galvanizing were my areas of competence. And I'm like, well, I actually feel kind of weak in the galvanizing area. But in the discernment area, I feel fairly strong in that area because even though I do have a lot of crazy ideas and sometimes it sounds like I'm jumping headfirst into them, I usually do take the time, I think, to like discern whether or not this is like the right time. He talks about how there's a lot of intuition in discernment. A lot of times, like, you can't really explain why you don't feel like something is right, but you just feel like it's not, like you just feel it, okay? That's a strength of a discerner. And if you're competent in it, you can do it for quite a long time without it draining you. Like you're pretty good at doing. My weak areas are enablement and tenacity, okay? I really do get frustrated if I have to, it's like I just start short circuiting when I have to do a lot of like really detailed work that's like just very concrete detailed work to like make stuff happen. I just get like, is this good enough? Like, and I'm not a perfectionist, and this is probably why, because I'm just like, did we get to the point? Like, is this good enough to get to the point? Like getting everything like perfect in the details is just super frustrating for me. Okay, which can be a weakness of mine. It's a weakness of mine because if I have to follow something through all the way to the end, I get frustrated sometimes. Like and it's not that I don't finish things, but it's that I have to be careful how many things I commit to having to finish if they're super detail oriented. It's better if I delegate that to somebody else. Okay. So that's the short version of working genius. All right. So I think that, again, that's a very helpful tool if you go back and look at your past work experience and say, maybe this is why I found this particular job super frustrating, or this is why I really enjoyed this. Like I guess I'm a galvanizer. Like I really enjoyed getting people excited, maybe like a sales sort of job or something like that. I really enjoyed that. Or, maybe you're like, oh yeah, I just like showing up and like helping people. Like I just really liked being able to show up and know that what I was doing, like, what do you need? I'll make sure it gets done. Okay, that might be an enabler or, and or a tenacity person. Okay. And if you tend, like me, to be more of a dreamer or an ideas person, and you find that like finishing things through and being in the moment and being in the details is like, it gets frustrating for you if you do it for a long time, you probably are going to want to find work people, teammates who are good at that, who you can delegate things to. Okay. And you always have to be communicating both ways with all of this. We'll talk more about that with actual like practical logistics with running a program. But just being aware of all of those things can help you head in the direction that you're really good at. Okay. So if you're like a more tenacious sensory type of person and you're like, well, I don't like, I want to just get my hands dirty and just get in and just do the things, do the daily things, right? That's what I really enjoy doing. I don't want to think about all the other stuff. Okay. That's just so valuable, right? And a lot of times that's like the person who's there doing the things. Okay. But you have to realize that maybe when challenges come up or when there's planning going on and like you're at the beginning of a project or launching something new, you might need somebody who is more of an ideas or a discerner person who can you could be like, this isn't my area of strength. I need to like hear from you and hear what you see and ideas that you have and understand that they might throw a bunch of ideas at you. You don't have to do them all, right? You can just listen and ask questions and, make sure you're communicating both ways and then bring up practical things, which is what you're good at. And it will help fill that gap for you. Okay. So we'll talk a little bit more later about organizational structure as far as like being a director of a program. I'm assuming you're a founder who's dreaming this up right now. But people are on all ends of the spectrum when they're founders. So what you want to do is head toward a position where you're going to thrive. And I think anyone can be a director as long as they understand their strength and they fill their gaps with people who will help balance out their weak areas. Okay. And also be confident in the area that you're good at. Like if you look back at your work experience, you use some of this language, maybe you take one of the quizzes or whatever, and you're like, you know what, I think I'm really good at this. This is why I always react this way or I ask these questions or, I'm really good at finishing things or whatever. And you're like, I'm really good at this. You could step into that and not feel like, oh, maybe I'm not supposed to do that. Maybe they had an idea. Maybe I shouldn't do it. This could cause a lot of problems because it just really can, because you can maybe be walking on eggshells or not step into who you really could be because you're not confident in the thing that you're bringing to the table. You're not confident in the thing that well, I'm really good at this thing. You know that inside of you, right? So you can present that to a room, or you could take the lead on something and just go ahead with something with confidence that no, I know what I'm doing here. I know what I'm bringing to the table here inside of you, right? I'm just going to go ahead and make this happen. I'm not going to wait for permission. I'm not going to wait for other people to tell me, what their ideas are or whatever, because this might be a weak area of theirs. Of course, you always get input. You always surround yourself with really smart people and you listen and communicate. But having confidence in what you're good at can really help you just keep moving forward and not feeling like you need to hold back. Okay, so I hope that was helpful. And we will move into talking about some really practical startup things coming up soon. And I will see you then. Thanks so much for listening today. Don't forget to subscribe and make sure you check out the resources I am developing at startahybridSchool.com. Send me an email anytime. I would love to hear from you. Until next time.